from the comfort of your home. You don't even have to go anywhere. Just come on over and you can chat with our experts in real time. And today we are talking with Justin Womack about the strategies and the tactics to quickly become an authority, a brand authority in your market, and position yourself as an industry leader. Because when you do that, three things happen. First, people trust you, so it's easier to make a sale. Second, you become kind of like a micro celebrity or even a full-on celebrity, right? And people want to listen to you and consume your content. And third, clients and PR and speaking opportunities come to you. So we're going to talk about how a newbie can become a thought leader, a brand authority in their niche right now. What you want to do is hop on in. thatgeek.com/live. Join us in the conversation. We are going to get started with That Geek Show. Welcome everyone to That Geek. I'm your host, Ifat Cohen. I've been told that I'm not saying my name enough, so people don't know how to pronounce it. So there it is, Ifat Cohen, your host, That Geek Show right here on thatgeek.com/live. Join us today to talk about how to build brand authority with Justin Womack. Justin, am I pronouncing your name right?
You got it. Close enough. Justin Womack, however you want to say it. It doesn't matter. It's very close. So I'm happy with your pronunciation.
Well, I get my name ordered all the time, so at least I make an effort. And it's really funny when I hear myself saying the names of my guests and I murder so many of them that it's kind of like, it's good karma.
Well, I used to work for a phone company, or not a phone company, but I used to work as like a telemarketer kind of sales rep. And I would constantly be called Jason on the phone. Oh. I remember it kind of gets under your skin a bit. So I can relate to like how it kind of sucks when people don't know how to pronounce your name properly. But you have a unique name, so you gotta practice.
Yeah. So when I go home and people actually back to Israel and people are actually pronounce my name right, I'm like, oh wow, yeah, that's me. They know how to say it. It's cool. So today we're talking about building brand authority. And what I love about this topic, and specifically about what you're bringing to the table, is you're not talking about just the big guys. We're going to talk about how a newbie starts that. And I was listening to a little bit of your story before, as a prep for our conversation. And you've had really, really interesting things happening in your life. Most of what that applies to what we're talking about today is you've had success. And it was fantastic, but you're working very hard. And then something happened and you found yourself in a river. So you want to talk about that for a second?
Sure, why not? So essentially I had been working so kind of real quick, brief backstory. I went to college at University of California, Santa Barbara, and I actually studied biopsychology, so like neuroscience, and went straight from that into working in property and casualty insurance, which has nothing to do with neuroscience or anything to do with anything. But it was the job that offered me the most money directly out of college. So I went into that and I stayed in that field for about 10 years.
Okay.
And kind of grew incrementally over time from like kind of entry-level positions, becoming a sales rep. And then at one point becoming the number one sales rep for my region in the company, which was pretty cool. But at the same time, I was working in a cubicle. I was separated. I felt isolated, and I was miserable. I absolutely hated every minute of that lifestyle, and I lived my entire life for like Saturday and Sunday. I remember counting down for the weekends. Like that's what was important to me.
Yeah.
And so escaping that was challenging. It was kind of because when you're in it, it feels like there's no escape. It feels like you can't get out of it. It feels like you've kind of locked yourself in. Your options are minimal. And even, when I was like 27, I thought, oh, wow, it's too late to do anything else in life. So it's too late. 27.
I know, right? And now you look back and you're like, oh man, I wish I was 27 again.
Yeah. Yeah, but ultimately, I had a kind of an epiphany at one point, and I did walk out from that industry. And what happened is, I guess, like kind of life kind of directed me a certain in a certain way. But I had discovered the seminar industry right after leaving that industry, and I just kind of had entered into it, and I was working behind the scenes for a pretty prominent seminar leader. And I'd started to kind of pick up a ton of like the principles of like copywriting, of CRM management, a lot of the marketing things that I'm now implementing in my own business. But what happened is during that time, I had drained myself. I had reached like a point of absolute exhaustion. I was building somebody else's dream, and it led to a point where, for whatever reason, I got involved in a major car accident, and it was more severe than you. When I say car accident, you're thinking, okay,
Whiplash or something, right?
yeah, whiplash, something like that. But my car rolled upside down, landed upside down underwater, and I was knocked unconscious and underwater in dirty water.
Wow.
So I developed a condition called ARDS, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome, and I spent 2 months in the ICU, 1 month in a medical coma. Had several surgeries,
Wow.
and came very close to death. So it was quite a life altering experience. I could tell you that when I woke up from my medical coma, and I kind of came to, it was about a month after the accident. That next month was probably the longest month of my life because I couldn't move from my bed.
Wow.
I had 8 chest tubes connected to me, pumping out sediment from out of my body because I had so much like dirt and sand and things like that was brought into my lungs.
Wow.
And so for another month where I couldn't move, I like once a day I would have a physical therapist come stand me up, but I was connected to so many tubes. It'd be like a 30-minute process to do the setup so I could stand. And when I would stand, the doctor described that as like, that was like the equivalent of me running a marathon at that point because my lungs had been so severely impacted.
Wow.
So
Wait, a lot of people, thank goodness, we're never at that point, right? We're never at a point where it's like, you can't move, right? And like, you're so sick and bacteria in your lungs and you can breathe and every little, you move a body part and it's like so much effort. But we hear that. So tell me a little bit about I can't imagine, right? I can't imagine they're like, okay, imagine being in bed and not being able to move and not knowing that you'll be able to move later, right? Mm-hmm. Like how does that, like some people will go into like deep depression over something like this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple different ways you can react to it. I mean, you can kind of embrace the diagnosis and become, and kind of take on the disability of it. Or you could try to do the opposite and try to use it as a challenge, as something to overcome. In the beginning, though, I mean, that wasn't the initial mindset from it. It was I don't know. I had a trach, so I was on a respirator for quite a while, for about 2 weeks, and they put a trach in, so I couldn't speak for that first month either. So I wasn't able to communicate. So I couldn't talk because I had a trach in.
Yeah.
So I could write. If I could, get a pen, and my hands weren't exactly operating at full potential, but I mean, I couldn't even talk, which was another thing. So that's when I say like the days were long. It was, I mean, I couldn't talk, I couldn't move. I'm bedridden, and it was very humbling in regard to the fact that I had to come to the grips with like. I thought I had like all this important work I was doing, and I'm not doing it now, and life goes on. Somebody else filled my role, did just fine.
Which is fascinating, because a lot of people say on your deathbed, it doesn't matter how many emails are in your inbox, right? Like really what matters is the relationship with people around you, those that you impacted, those that, really touch your life or that you've touched, right?
And go ahead. And the people that came and visited while I was in the hospital, like, it meant a lot when I was awake and they came and visited me. I mean, that was really, really powerful stuff. Just to have somebody come, even just say hello, whatever it was, it meant the world at the time, because like there was just it was just so mentally taxing to be in that position.
Yeah.
So like any kind of break from my monotony of just sitting in a bed and, having a TV on and that's it, was like a huge relief for me. But I mean, tying this to business, it was also like this epiphany of, hey, life is really short. I shouldn't even be alive anymore.
Right.
I mean, the diagnosis that I received has a mortality rate around like 80%.
Wow.
So because I was younger is one of the reasons I was able to survive. And most people that get that will not have survived that. I mean, the doctors were pretty amazed that I came out of it the way I did. So it was, I mean, there's like this sense, like I've had so many people tell me, and I'm not even gotten into the story of like how I got out of that car, because I actually had somebody rescue me out of the car that witnessed this accident and dove in and like pulled me out of the car. So there was, I mean, there's a lot of like crazy things that happen to kind of keep me on this planet and keep me alive. So I have to express a sense of gratitude for that, and then I have to realize like, okay, if I want to continue, there's a greater purpose behind some of the stuff that I need to do now. And, I can't tell you how many people have told me that like, okay, well, you're obviously here for some kind of a reason and some kind of a purpose.
No pressure, right? No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure, right? Well, I joke because since the accident, I have gotten married. So I married my girlfriend at the time. Now we're married, and we've had a child. So now I say that some of that pressure I could press onto him now because I survived, so he could be born. So
exactly right.
He gives me a little bit of a break, but he doesn't know that yet because he's only 1.5. So
I was about to say, I was like, no Nobel Prize yet? Like, come on.
Yeah.
How long
Not
does
yet.
it take? What am I asking? One Nobel Prize? Come on.
But again, like bringing it to business, this is what kind of drew me towards the path of going from behind the scenes to running my own company. And this is what put me on a path to, okay, I need to figure this out, because what I didn't say is I am a natural introvert. Mm-hmm. So I need to find a way where I can be front and center, I can run a company, and I can kind of leverage the skills that I have and get the most out of it. And this is kind of what led me on this kind of journey. And I had, when I finally got out of the hospital, I had so much atrophy that I couldn't lift my arms over my body. And I had about a year of non-working where I was rebuilding my body also.
Wow.
So during that year was a lot of reading, a lot of learning, a lot of diving into tons of different business philosophies and kind of laying the groundwork for what would later become my agency and my business.
So who did you listen to while you were in that year? Who were you consuming? What information were you feeding your brain with?
So before I'd gotten started, one of my mentors teaches neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. Mm-hmm. So I consumed a lot of that type of content. I think this was maybe the year after that, but I really got into Gary Vaynerchuk and like super, like I listened to the Ask Gary V book, like 7 times. I just had it like on loop in my car for like a year there. And there's just so he just gives and gives and gives, and he has a ton of value. And what was interesting is I've actually found that like for audiobooks, a lot of times I have to listen more than once to really get the true value out of a book like that. Where my natural inclination is I want to just listen to a book, go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one, because I want to consume the most possible. But the reality is that often, like if I want to actually implement what I'm learning, it takes a certain level of repetition. Right. And then
it's a really good point, because a lot of people, you see who you think is very successful online and you're going like, oh, they just got it, right? It just came out. It just happened. They just read a book and ta-da, it's all right there. But, the road to Carnegie Hall, what is it? It's practice, right? So everybody has to walk the path, and everybody has to listen to it a few times, and everybody has to fail a few times and try and get better and better and better. I'm sure when, you listen to your first podcast, you're like, oh, I'm watching my first interviews from like 5 years ago, and I'm like, come on, tank tops, really? So there's a lot of stuff. Yeah.
To that point, just on like going from like the level of growth from like podcast 1 to podcast 100, it's kind of funny because I've had the conversation with my co-host because if you don't know, I run a podcast, co-host a podcast called Marketing Geeks, and we're top 10 in the category of marketing on Apple Podcasts right now.
Which is amazing podcast, guys. Highly, highly recommended. I'm addicted from the first interview that I listened to. So
thank you, appreciate that. But we've talked about like taking down like episode 1 because it was super. We almost like recorded that one on like a whim. We weren't even sure we were going to really pursue the podcast. And, but to me, it's a sign of growth, and it's a sign that like, I want people to hear where we started and where we are now, because I think that's part of the journey. Yep. Now, I've talked to a few people that have they say, okay, maybe you could leave that, but maybe you re-record like a new intro for the episode and like give a little disclaimer, like, hey, this was episode 1. If you think this is a little bit rough, maybe listen to a newer one. And that's an idea, but right now I've just kind of left things as is, and I think that it is what it is. If somebody comes in and listens to episode 1 and they assume that's how the entire show is, then that's on them.
Well, luckily, people start kind of like from the newest to the oldest in podcasting, right? So,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little different than like a sitcom or like a TV show. So I think most people, especially in the format that we're running now, where every episode now is pretty much interview content, there's really no reason to start with the first episode unless you catch like a certain name that you want to hear, or a certain topic. Yeah.
Right. And so you're spending a year getting your body back, basically, right? Learning how to use your body again. Yep. Consuming Gary Vee, which is so I want to say divisive.
I think he is to an extent. Like I've heard definitely people that disagree, but usually it's more of like a misunderstanding where they hear the message of like hustle 24/7, and they don't agree with that part of the message.
Yeah,
that's usually what I hear. That's usually the criticism. But I think if you really listen to the whole body of his work, there is more to it than that. But I do agree that there are limits. Obviously, that's part of the reason that I think I got into my initial predicament was I pushed my limits too far.
Yeah.
So there are limits, and you can't hustle forever. Yeah.
No, and I was interviewing Roland Frazier, and he was like, don't hustle, just outsource your weaknesses. Like find what you're not good at, what people love to do that you hate to do. Let them do what they love to do, and you do what you love to do, and then everybody's happy. I think, but Roland is at a different level, right? Where he can just delegate, where other people are newbies, they're starting anew. And so let's help them. So then you wanted to come out from behind the scenes, be the face of your business, become an authority. What was the first step that you were taking?
So you have to remember that I was working right before that accident. I was working for a seminar company behind the scenes, running some of the back operations. Mm-hmm. So again, I had been picking up the copywriting. I had learned about like joint venture partnerships and launches. I became familiar with Infusionsoft, like the software. I had a lot of like ground building skill sets that kind of came from that work. So moving from there was kind of finding a path for me to take this out and kind of implement some of the strategies that I learned from the seminar industry into ways that I could help like other small business owners to market their businesses. Mm-hmm. And as I consumed content, one of the other books that I came across, which was to me like the most life-changing and kind of what led to this whole topic of authority building that we're about to talk about, was the book Influence by Robert Cialdini.
Yes.
And one of the most powerful books I've ever read, and I had the privilege of seeing him speak at Traffic and Conversion 2 years ago, I think it was. But just an incredible book. What were you saying though?
Yeah, no. So what I love about Cialdini is like how he, if you don't know the 6 principles of influence, it's reciprocity, authority, scarcity, relationship, and
social
consistency.
Proof.
Right, like yes, social proof and consistency. Which, if you're doing all these things, then you start to become an influence, because if you're giving, people want to give you back. That's reciprocity. If you are only offering something for a limited time, then you become coveted and you become a little influencer. So the book is fantastic. It's amazing. So how were you applying that for your business?
Well, what I found is when I first started. Okay, so when I started my business, my marketing business. I found that I started going to local events, and local events are not usually the ideal place to find digital marketing clients, but you
Right.
are going to find some there. And so I started going like local chamber events and things like that. And I quickly, came to realize that most of these events are people passing out business cards, very hollow relationships, like almost like mindlessly passing out business cards without even like intention behind it.
Right.
And I came to realize that it's really easy to get lost in that shuffle. And so in order to succeed in that kind of environment, you have to create a level of authority. Mm-hmm. And in this environment, the way that I was able to achieve that really, really quickly, and one of the principles that I talk about with authority building is the idea of public speaking.
Yeah.
And so,
so wait a second. So that's really interesting because you're an introvert, and the first thing you did was go public speaking. So talk about that.
Yes. So part of the neurolinguistic programming training. So it's tough to kind of I bounce around. But part of the training involved learning some skills for public speaking, which helped me grow a lot. I had been doing Toastmasters before that, and I had been working on my public speaking for quite a while. Plus, I had worked in insurance as a salesperson, so I had some level of competency with public speaking.
Okay, that's important because a lot of people will be like, first thing I need to do, go public speaking. Okay, where do I speak? And they don't have all the experience that you just mentioned, Toastmasters.
Yes. So I can lay some tools out for learning the skill set too.
Yeah.
But public speaking just does a number of things. When you speak on stage, whether it's deserved or not, you are perceived in an entirely different light by the people in that audience. Right. Like suddenly you become important. It's pretty incredible. Like I've now attended seminars where I've been in just in the irregular audience. And there's a certain level of interaction with the rest of the crowd, and then I get brought up on stage, and after that, it's like you have that micro celebrity status where people want to come and talk to you, and like you're getting constant conversations, and it's funny. And what changed? Well, the only thing that changed was that I suddenly was on stage for a short period of time. That's it. Nothing else changed. But the perception of who I was as a person, the perception of what I could do for them changed. So they saw me in a light like, wait a minute, this guy could benefit me now. They could value for them shows up suddenly.
So let's talk about this for a second, because were you talking in chambers of commerce and like small businesses without like pitch? There's two different types of speaking, right? Pay to speak and pitch from the stage. So which one were you doing, or were you just doing it for the experience?
So initially, I was running workshops through the chamber, so I volunteered to run workshops. Mm-hmm. As it turned out, they didn't have restrictions on if I could make an offer at the end or not, so I was able to make an offer.
Nice.
So I was able to do that, but I mean, even if I wasn't, I would be able to make. I mean, generally speaking, if you can't make an offer, you can give out a free gift, and you can get email addresses, you can get information, you can collect the audience info.
Right.
So there's always a path to monetization long term. Mm-hmm. And but again, like the power of doing this, it creates a reputation around you, and it creates a level of prestige that does not exist without being the guy doing the talks.
Right. So how hard was it for you to actually book yourself to speak? You said you volunteered with the chamber, but like if someone would you say that's the first step? Find a place, volunteer, and get to speak, or different ways?
Yeah, the way I did it was relationship building, and this chamber of commerce fortunately had a room available, and they were already running workshops, so I was able to just kind of approach the head and pitch them on a certain type of workshop, and they were all about it. They thought it provided value to the chamber, and they had no problem putting me on. I did have to join the chamber in order to teach the workshop. That's I find that as a small point of entry.
Right. So that's really important, right? So like, guys, if you want, your first step is you want to become an authority, especially in a local market, go to the local organizations, build relationships with the chambers, with the professional organizations, with the places where your audience is, right? Because that's important. You don't want to go to where your peers are, because your peers already know everything. You want to go to where your audience is and add value to them. So step one, find where your audience is hanging out, join them, and speak in front of them. right?
Yeah. Now, but there's a lot of ways of finding these kind of speaking opportunities as well. So it's funny how they kind of compound too, because when you're running a speaking gig, like say I ran a workshop at the Chamber of Commerce, every time I did one, I had a sheet that would go out to every member in the audience asking a couple of questions. And one of the check mark boxes was, do you know anyone that like needs a speaker, or do you are there any, like, would anyone be interested in booking me to speak, kind of thing. And so it's kind of interesting how sometimes people will check that box, and it might lead to another opportunity to give a talk. And I'm a believer that in the beginning, I mean, I think you're going to have different philosophies on this, but I'm a believer that in the beginning you should be speaking for free, and you should be speaking as often as possible, and you should be speaking without regard of whether you're going to make money or not, because it's practice, it's exposure, there's value in it.
Right.
To me, there's a lot of, I'm not afraid to put in a lot of hours that lay out certain levels of groundwork for what I'm going to call authority building again,
Totally.
because I see the long-term play of it. I see long-term value. I'm not stuck in like a short-term mentality.
Which is really important, because a lot of people, we're like in this like instant gratification mode, and all the marketing that we see in front of us is like, make $1 million by, sleeping, drinking Muay Thais on the beach, right? And the notion now is that you're one funnel away from becoming the biggest authority in the market,
great
right?
catchphrase. I love the catchphrase.
It is a great catchphrase, right? Just like one funnel away. So you're one speaking engagement away from becoming, Tony Robbins. But there's a lot of work that goes into that I think people don't realize just how much work goes into it. So you've laid the groundwork, you've built a relationship, you started speaking. That's one way of building authority. Did that lead to something else, or did that like build any?
Well, I mean, ultimately the way I look at authority is like the core fundamental skill set that you're going to need to master to develop authority in your business is public speaking. Mm-hmm. So this is going to branch out into a number of different subcategories I'll talk about. Mm-hmm. But public speaking is at the core of everything with authority building, because you need to become the face of your business. You're building almost like a personal brand for yourself. And then again, you're elevating your status in the eyes of other people.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to this core skill set of public speaking. Now, beyond just giving keynote talks, let's say, or leading workshops, some of the other opportunities out there, well, we could talk about like what you do, Yvonne, is live video. Like live video. Anyone can do live video from the comfort of their home. And there's like, that right now, I mean, to this day, it remains the highest level of engagement with your audience is going to come through live video.
True.
The podcast medium is what I've really taken on recently. The podcast medium is a huge opportunity, especially for people that don't, I always hear the complaint, or not the complaint, but the argument that I don't want to do live video because I have to go do my makeup, or I have to go get ready and shower and all this. And so podcasting takes that worry away. But I mean, some people would like to do video also, but if you're just doing audio only podcast, you could take that objection away. And it's another opportunity to get the same kind of exposure. There's a huge opportunity in the podcast market. Let's talk about
that for a second, because a lot of people, myself included, kind of feel like, back, was it 2012 when I first interviewed John Lee Dumas, and mm-hmm. one of my viewers asked him, how are you going to monetize this thing? And he was like, I don't know. And here we are now. Now people, it kind of feels like it's a little saturated. Is it?
Well, it is, but in comparison to something like YouTube, we're talking completely low numbers. So there's less than 1 million podcasts right now. It's around 900,000 last I've heard with recent statistics. Mm-hmm. With YouTube, there are tens of millions or approaching 100 million channels out there. So when we're talking about levels of competition, yes, podcasting is more saturated than it was, but it's going to continue to become more and more saturated. But right now, it's still pretty early in the game. I mean, we're talking 900,000 podcasts. That's not that many. That's a lot, but it's not that many. And not all of them are going to be active podcasts. Not all of them are regularly producing content.
Right.
But again, the power.
They start and then they drop it because they didn't get anything after 30 episodes.
And that's a mistake, because again, most people have that short-term mentality mindset that I have to profit from this in the short term. With Marketing Geeks, we didn't really make any money in the first year.
Yeah.
We started monetizing it in the second year, and the benefits of it are not all monetary. I mean, they're not just pure money. There's tons of things that come from this. Like the relationships that we've been able to build through the podcast have been absolutely immeasurable for the business. We're now able to have people. We've had people like John Lee Dumas on our show. We've had Pat Flynn on our show. We've had Orrin Clough on our show. We've had Christopher Lockhead. These are people that normally you have to pay a lot of money to have one-on-one time with, and we're getting to spend time with them. They're coming to us on our podcast because we positioned ourselves as a leading podcast. And that comes down again to the fact that we're out there public speaking, we're presenting ourselves in a certain light, and it's working. That's authority building to me is doing this, and then all of a sudden, the people that never would have given me the time of day otherwise are now showing up on the podcast and contributing.
Totally. And the same exact thing, guys, is what I'm doing when I am connecting with high-level individuals, right, that you'll never talk to. You have to, if you go to a live event to listen to Gary Vaynerchuk talk, right, speak, all you do is listen to him talk, which is probably the same thing that you can listen to him on YouTube. But when you interview him or when you bring him in, now you have a relationship and a conversation, and, find the Gary V's in your market, right? Gary V is like huge in our market, but there are so many other niches where people really shine there, and you get to talk to them face to face, one-on-one. Roland Frazier is $25,000 a speech, right? The guy that you interview, Philip Stout, right?
Philip Stutz, yeah.
Stutz, yeah.
Yeah,
Huge,
big political marketer.
Yeah, amazing, right? So you get to build relationships with really highly connected, wonderful people, and they get to know you on a personal level. And there's a conversation that happened before you press the record button on a podcast or press the live button on live videos. There's a lot that happens before and after, and it's fantastic it's a fantastic way to use technology to really scale your relationship and build your network. Before the next question, Adil is watching us and he's asking, how do you feel the podcast talk time so there's enough content and value?
That's a good question. I find, we have if you've ever listened to Marketing Geeks, we have a very free-flowing podcast, and it's evolved over time. The first year that we ran our show was purely content episodes. So pretty much the first year, I think was 9, maybe one exception to that, was me and my co-host teaching marketing topics. Mm-hmm. Moving forward in year 2 and beyond, we started having PR companies and potential guests reach out to the show wanting to be a guest on the show. And so we evolved the show over time to bring them on. And I find the interview format, extremely easy to fill time. A lot of times for me, I could take an interview and take it to 2 or 3 hours if I really wanted to. We have to cut it short at an hour because I'm just naturally a curious person. I have a lot of questions for people, and I'm sincerely asking questions where I want to know the answer for myself a lot of times. I believe that if you're listening to a marketing podcast and I'm a marketer, the questions that I have should be relevant for my audience. Yeah. So, I'm asking, sometimes the show can get advanced for people, but I believe that that's what makes a great podcast, and I believe that there's an audience for that, and people want to hear some of the questions that don't normally get asked. So for me, I just find that
amazing. So, guys, again, go listen to the podcast. It's a fantastic podcast, really fantastic interview. And what I love about this, Justin, is I'm listening to the podcast, and every question that I have in my mind, you guys ask it, and I'm like, oh, how do they do that? And then you guys ask that question. So it's really, guys, go listen to it. Marketing Geeks.
And I think having that, just kind of approaching an interview with a certain mindset of curiosity just helps in general to keep the conversation flowing and so when you're having people that you're interviewing where you're genuinely interested in what they do for a living and how they serve their customers and how they attract their business, it makes for us, it's super easy conversation. So so I have no problem filling that void. One of the, possibly I have a co-host. So yeah. if you're having trouble filling the void, consider a co-host too. That's another thing that might help, so that if you run out of questions, your co-host can kind of come in and pick up the slack too. So that's another kind of idea that you might consider in the process.
Yeah, we have a comment from Twitter. Ash is saying, "This is great. Thanks, Ash." we do have a hard stop today, so I do want to get to all the ways that you can build an authority very quickly. So one of them, public speaking. Start with that because you need to know how to speak to the public. The second one, have a live interview show like me, or have a podcast like Justin, or just have some kind of a way that you're communicating and interviewing people and reaching out and building your network, so that you can become the authority because it's your platform, you're the interviewer, you're the host. What's the third one?
Well, the third one is writing a book. And I've recently I've been reminded that the word authority, the root of the word, has the word author in it, and so I think it's at least at the very least it's a good metaphor. And because it's so powerful how it's easier than ever for anyone to get a book published with the Amazon Create Space, which is the where you could just submit basically a PDF document or a Word document and convert it into an ebook through Amazon. It's so easy to do these days that it's when you're in the industry, it almost takes away. For me, it's it doesn't mean as much when I hear someone's an author as it used to. But for the everyday person out there, being an author is still a big deal. And it totally changes the conversation. And when people are introduced on stage, being introduced as a best-selling author or as an author versus being introduced as a business owner and a speaker, it's a different sentiment. And people still to this day hold authors in a certain esteem, and they instantly perceive them as experts. And again, I will say there's a number of ways of kind of creating a perception of being an expert. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's true, but there are definitely shortcuts to being seen as an expert status, and public speaking and writing a book and are ways of kind of creating that perception in the general environment.
So let's talk about that for a second, because right before in the green room, right before we started and pressed the live button, I was telling you that I want to do a little challenge for myself and see, get Amazon bestseller done, because it's not very difficult. Like Justin was saying, 20-page book and you got yourself a book. Put a PDF on Amazon and you got yourself a book.
And a few tricks too to get to Amazon.
Right? And then you can become a bestseller in a certain category, and then you grab that screenshot and you put that on your website, and now you're a best-selling author. And I want to see what happens to the authority, your authority, when you got that Amazon bestseller. And so we were joking about that, hey, let's publish that on April 1st and see,
let's track how many speaking gigs we can book.
Exactly.
To me, the point of a book is not to sell books. I mean, unless you're getting published professionally by Simon & Schuster or one of the major publishing companies, you're not writing a book to get published. You're writing a book to book speaking gigs, which is how you can tie a book into public speaking again. Because having a book is one of the fastest and easiest ways to pitch yourself to a promoter that's booking public speakers. So if you want to get booked on a stage, by being an author, it adds a sense of value to you, and it creates that expert perception that will help you get booked on stages. Plus, in any environment, it gives you an opportunity, even for small talks, to present your book, and again, it just creates that level of perception where people just instantly take you seriously. And especially for a younger person, it's a great way of kind of overcoming that fear of being too young to be taken seriously. I'm seeing this more and more with people that are 18 to 22 that are publishing books, and it's kind of a way of getting through that hurdle.
Yeah, and like we were saying, guys, publishing a book is not what it used to be. It used to be very hard. You have to pitch it to a publisher. You actually had to write a book. And apparently now people don't even read books. They'll open it and, there's nothing. And they don't care, right? So if you want to learn how to write a book, I actually interviewed Martin, I forget his last name, how to write an entire book without writing one word. We have a step-by-step system. If you want to follow that with us, comment below. I'll let you know where it is. And maybe Justin and I will do a little challenge and become best-selling authors on April 1st.
It does open up an interesting conversation about, you're pushing ethical boundaries at times with some of this stuff. So it opens up an interesting dialogue in that regard. I believe there needs to be a certain level of integrity. If you're booking yourself, if you're writing a book and you're wanting to use it to get booked on stages, like you shouldn't be doing it with malicious intent. You should be doing it because you're genuinely a student of the subject and you have something to add and add value. So I do believe in that. Now, in the same regard of like public speaking, there's still like celebrity attachment is still a thing. And you see this with, if you're doing a podcast interview or something. And the biggest, like I mentioned, having Pat Flynn and John Lee Dumas, just having those people on your show also creates a boost in perceptual authority. And so this idea of celebrity attachment, but also in like positioning of where you're speaking or where, because when I talk about, there's also a whole industry of paying to speak. People are paying money to go speak at big venues, and they're paying to get the backdrop behind them that I spoke at this highly prestigious area. And I mean, again, it comes down to intention, I guess, is my philosophy. Because if you're doing it because your intention is to create a greater perceptual authority, but your ultimate intention is to serve people and to do good work, it's a positive. Now, if your intention is malicious and you're looking to manipulate people and scam them out of money, not going to be behind you in that regard. But again, it's like that's the way that these kind of techniques work. They're for good and for evil. And what the most fascinating thing to me was I listened to an interview with Robert Cialdini, the author of the book Influence, that a lot of this stuff is kind of derived from. And he wrote that book for consumers to not get scammed from marketers. But you know who bought the book?
All the
marketers, not consumers. The marketers bought the book and they're like, oh, this is great.
All I have to do is reciprocity, make them like me. Yeah.
Which I think is so funny because, his idea was I want to empower consumers so that they know what tactics are being used against them. That's why he wrote the book. That was his intention, or at least that's his stated intention. And it's just amazing how that turned out in reality.
It's really fascinating. I'm reading a book now, Ryan Hanley, I believe. Trust Me, I'm Lying. And it's Confession of a Media Manipulator. Have you read that one?
I have not read it. I believe I've seen it though.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So it gives you like all this stuff, right? That this is how you cater to blogs, and this is how you get your content in the media without having to pay, and this is how you build a buzz and all that jazz. And it's fascinating because it does two things, right? On one hand, it goes like, that's how they're playing me, right? And then as a marketer and business owner goes like, can I play them?
There's opportunities here. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of people are, when you see like as seen in Forbes magazine or as seen in the NBC, a lot of people are paying for that. They're paying PR companies to just kind of do that for them. So it is a little bit of a game in some respects, and it's kind of it's a bit of a challenge. And so, I mean, you can look at this in a couple different ways. I think you're at a disadvantage if you try to play it completely straight. But I understand why you would want to do that. But I do think you're putting yourself at a disadvantage because you're up against people that this is what people are doing.
And it's good to know, right? And so now that you know that this is what the market is doing, then you can decide how do you want to play it as well. Do you want to play by the rules, or do you want to, not break the rules and do something different? Which is what I want to do. Like, I'm bluntly saying it out there. I really want to see what happens when you become an Amazon bestseller, not with a really amazing book, just with the title, right? And see how that changes marketing and perception. If it does, I don't know if I'm going to be happy or sad about this,
Well, I think, again, if you're taking on that challenge, I think part of that is start simultaneously pitching yourself for speaking gigs and things like that. Because again, I think, I don't think a book will do anything for your business other than give you a little bit of an edge in positioning and prestige. That's it. So it's a glorified business card in the modern era, is what it really is.
It's true. And just having a book and not marketing the book is not going to do anything to anyone, right?
Now, nobody's going to find your book.
Right.
So like you might sell one book, two books in your lifetime if you do nothing to market your book, and that's probably unlikely that even happens. Nobody's going to find your book. Most people don't want to read your book. I mean, that's the reality of it, at least from a general standpoint. I mean, I think there are exceptions to the rule, and there are people that will break through. But the general rule of thumb is that very few people, even the ones that buy your book, are going to read it. They might skim the table of contents. They might catch a couple sentences, but very few people are going to go cover to cover and read the book. And so it's a kind of, which makes the whole thing fascinating. And again, I find I find a lot of it's interesting, but it's kind of like it's all public relations. And now one other thing that I find is the more I dig into this, the more I learn about like awards too. A lot of awards are like, how well are you lobbying the awards company? How well, or are you donating or paying the awards company? I mean, and oftentimes you have to pay to apply to get an award, and by paying, there's nobody else applying, and you're like the default winner. So it's just interesting to kind of pull the curtain back on a lot of like, what does it really mean to win when you see like on the wall of a business that they won this award? What does it really mean?
Right, exactly. And
you can even certifications, you can say the same thing too.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so we're living in this world where you do need to build an authority, and there are so many ways to kind of like, break the game. Give me a different name for that, like, cheat on the game or something like that, right? There are so many ways that you can look like $1 million without being $1 million. And even worse, you can look like $1 million. You can look like you know what you're doing and you have no idea what you're doing, which is really, really bad, because when people see that perception, when they see that and they go like, oh, that guy's the best because look at his pictures. And then they start working with them and they don't get the results that were promised. Now we're burning an entire industry, right?
Well, the great equalizer is this, that the reputations matter still.
Yeah.
So, and reputations spread faster than ever because of the internet. So that's the good news. The good news is that there is a great equalizer. It is reputation. And people can sniff out these days, like, you also have to produce certain levels of content. If your content sucks, you're not going to keep your audience. You've done all the right positioning. You've created like an opportunity to build an audience. But if your content sucks, they're not sticking around. And if you burn a few customers, that reputation eventually will stick to you, and you will no longer be able to thrive in business. So you might have a year or two of success, but ultimately that's not going to be long-term. Nobody's going to build a long-term business by cheating these strategies. You can leverage these to help kind of accelerate the process, but you have to be doing the groundwork and building a congruent, true business simultaneously. Like, you need to be providing value. You need to be giving value. You need to be building relationships with customers. You're not going to, you're not going to build a business off of manipulating and burning customers. And if you're able to do that, it's going to last for a very short period of time before you're found out and the whole thing collapses.
And you said one really important word there. You said an audience. And an audience is completely different than fans, than followers, than friends on Facebook. An audience has a relationship with you, which is what you are able to build when in your podcast, right? When you're actually communicating with people, you can use social media to do that. You can use your email list to do that. But you do have to build that type of trusting relationships, because there's no more trust online anymore. And so you do have to be that person who is trustworthy. Otherwise, you'll be murdered in chats and everything.
Well, I mean, and the internet's like provided all these techniques and strategies, and that's why a lot of the trust that existed has been eroded, and it continues to kind of erode. And we're seeing some paradigm shifts. Some of the sales strategies and techniques that were like hard sales tactics. What I'm seeing is a trend where they're not as effective. They're still effective, and they'll always have a certain level of effectiveness, but I don't see them as effective as they were 5 years ago. And I do think we're coming into a trend where transparency and honesty and kind of pulling the curtain back and revealing like what's really going on is kind of the way of the future. Yeah. And I think that that'll continue to be the way that things happen. And so that's which is good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic, because it means that, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and we're talking about all the awesome experts there, Jay Abraham and Joe Polish, right? And
Yeah.
amazing people that kind of like paved the way. And they are being replaced by a new generation, right? And it's really interesting. Like even Amy Porterfield is not new so much, right? Or Marie Forleo, they're not so new. There are new people who are coming in and they're taking their place. And what's really weird about how it shifts, right, is like Jay Abraham and all those guys, right, his generation were very much about like high value, high content, really masters of the word and the language, and very, philosophical and intellectual in people. Right. And now we're getting into the 7-second TikTok videos where there's no content, there's just entertainment. And these people are becoming the influencers. So it's really interesting to see where our society is moving in terms of content and what becomes valuable.
Yeah. Well, I do like I talk a lot about Gary Vaynerchuk, but I like that he talks about never to get married to platforms and never get married to strategies, because the world of marketing is in constant flux and constant evolution. And if you're stuck in what worked last year and you want to just stick there and you're afraid to keep diving into new territories and testing and continuing to grow, you're going to get left behind eventually.
That's true.
And so I think some people got stuck in certain certain ideologies and they got complacent. And that's why they've at least temporarily been left behind. Now they may make a resurgence because a lot of those people that you mentioned are very, very smart people and can easily come back to the limelight. But I do think that there's a tendency for people that they find something that works and they double down, triple down, quadruple down, and then they stop learning the new stuff. And the way that business is going is that you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to be in constant evolution, because that's just the reality of the current world we live in.
And, and what I love about what we're sharing today is that these concepts that you're sharing are timeless. You're always going to need relationships. Public speaking is not going to go away because that's how we communicate with each other. Even if robots takes over the world and technology overwhelms us, we still need that one-on-one interaction, and there's nothing that replaces public speaking. The authority that you were talking in podcasting, same thing. That's conversations between people adding value. Live does exactly the same thing. And books, I mean, hopefully they'll never disappear. Who knows, right?
And I do think we're moving into an era of customer empowerment or client empowerment. Yeah. So I think the client is more powerful than they've ever been in these relationships, and they have more flexibility than they've ever had. And so I do think beyond just the authority building, it's also who is taking the best care of their clients and who's going above and beyond and expressing gratitude and expressing thanks and sending gifts and sending things like that to actually show value. So I think that part of the new era of business is also like, what's funny is Gary Vaynerchuk wrote a book in 2012 called The Thank You Economy, which I think is probably becoming more and more relevant now. Right. And I think he kind of joked about how he was like well ahead of his time with that one. Yeah. But I think that's where things are moving. And part of marketing part of your marketing budget needs to be spent on your retention and your giving to your customers to keep them.
Totally. I listened to an interview with Duncan, forget his last name because it's European, but he, the former innovative guy at Disney, and he was talking about how exactly what you were saying. When Generation Z goes to Home Depot and they need to choose a hammer, they don't care, about the tool. They care about their house and how they feel in it, and and everything. And does the hammer that I'm buying right now, is that benefiting the world, right? Is it like
which is new to Generation Z? Like that component of like the more collectivist mindset seems to be like a newer thing for Generation Z, where like the previous generations were more individualistic. I think we're seeing that shift a bit into at least it seems like it. I don't have the data to back that up, but I do see that shift happening.
Which is really interesting because it means as a company, as someone who wants to become an authority and build a real business, not like a overnight success that disappears, someone who really wants to be here for the long run, you need to start thinking about exactly what Justin is saying. Like, how do you build those relationships with your audience? And how do you transform your marketing from like talking at people into an experience with them? And one of the best ways to do that, right, is public speaking, again, because you're right there having conversation. Podcast is great. Live conversations like this are amazing. And then following up, like if you have a book and they bought your book, or if they're in your email, there are so many other ways that you can make them feel special without breaking the bank, right?
And don't be afraid to give give your best stuff away. A lot of times, and this might be widespread now, but we had that question earlier about like, how do I fill the content of a podcast episode? Well, don't be afraid to like share your best stuff, because the reality is that about the way I see it, like 90% of people will enjoy listening to an episode where I talk about high level concepts, but 90% of them are not going to be the ones that are going to implement those strategies. And what they're looking for is they're looking to kind of get a baseline to understand them a bit, and then they're looking to hire it out. And oftentimes what happens is the person that teaches it to them is the one that they initially go to hire to have the fulfillment done.
Right.
And I think there's a general like scarcity mindset that is pervasive in old school business, that we need to be fearful of what we share with our competitors. Like if you ever go to chamber events, like we can only have one person from each industry, which is like, to me, super old school like thinking.
Yeah.
And then we can, and I can't give away my best stuff, because if I give away my best stuff, nobody will ever do business with me. Well, the reality is that's completely the opposite. And it might be counterintuitive to talk about, but it's like my experience has been completely 180 from that.
Which, it's because I always talk about like information is not, we're not lacking information. We got Siri, we got Google, we have YouTube, we have Quora. There's no lack of information, right? So what's missing is exactly what you're talking about, Justin, is that relationship with people. And when you give your best, right, people all of a sudden trust you, because everything else online is fake. And sometimes not everything, right? But a lot of stuff online is kind of like exaggerated to make a point, to make a marketing point.
I heard a great saying, and I don't know if this is just fluff, but I love it. It was, the world is drowning in information, but thirsting for wisdom. And I forget exactly who said it. It was somebody at a seminar not too long ago.
That's very good.
It was like, to me, it just kind of resonated. And I think it's so true. There's so much information out there, but we don't necessarily know what's what. And there's just like, what we're really seeking is wisdom. And I think that's kind of like the piece that everyone really wants.
So two things before we finish. One, speaking of wisdom and speaking of giving your best, you have a checklist that will help you guys build your authority. All you have to do is come here to thatgeek.com/live. Right to the right of the video, you'll see Justin on stage. And you can just click that and you can download for free your authority building checklist. And you can just go through that and apply all of them. It might take you a little bit of time if public speaking is on it. It might not be done in a day, but you'll have the entire checklist and you can start slowly positioning yourself as the authority. Do you want to share a little bit about what's that? And then I'm going to take another question from Adil, who's watching us.
Yeah. So the authority checklist is it's going to cover a lot of what we covered today, but it kind of summarize it into just some key components and key tips. But essentially, it's breaking down the ideas of what are the shortcuts where I can create a level of prestige and positioning in my market to be perceived as the leading authority on the topic. And some of the ones mentioned: podcasting, public speaking, writing a book. These are the strategies that are they're basic in nature, but they're critical.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of lay those out in the checklist.
So hop over to thatgeek.com/live. To the right of the video, download that. Question from Adil is, what's your daily work ethic advice to keep things moving and interesting?
Work ethic advice. Man, I feel like
ethics. Who needs ethics? Come on. Trust me, I'm lying.
For me, like my struggle has been time management, and it's something I've been working on, especially in the last year. I find one of the things that I found really important is I read a book called Atomic Habits recently, which I highly recommend anyone to read.
What is it called?
But it's called Atomic Habits.
Uh-huh.
But it just talks about like creating micro goals for yourself. So if you have like big tasks to complete, like set aside 10 minutes a day and commit to 10 minutes of doing that one task. And over time, it's amazing, like the accumulation of days and weeks and months. It's amazing, like what actually gets accomplished when you do that. Because it's easy to forget that, like, if I have a month deadline and I have a notorious habit of waiting till the last minute to do a project for a client or something like that, if I'm putting in just 10 minutes a day, that's it, just 10 minutes a day, after a week, that's a little over an hour a week. And by the time we get there, I've already put in 4 hours into the project. And likely when you set aside 10 minutes and you commit to 10 minutes, you're going to go beyond that too. So if you can just guarantee that you'll put in a certain number of amount of time per day on these things, and then leave yourself a little bit of wiggle room for the potential that maybe you go a little bit longer. I've had some pretty cool results come from that. That's something I've actually just started really implementing in January of this year.
Yeah, it's there's a great movie about that. Brittany runs a marathon, and it's about a heavy girl who is depressed, loses her job, can't do anything, and she meets her neighbor, and the neighbor is a runner, and she goes like just one block, right? And then she runs just one block in that day, and then by the end of it, she runs a marathon with just one block. And there's the other one where someone was telling me, if you just do 25 squats, like 4 times a day, you did 100 squats a day, which is like, oh my God, how am I going to do 100 squats a day? Just do 25.
Just do 5 squats. Get started with that. Start with, don't even start smaller and build, because 25 might be intimidating, but five's doable. I could do 5. And if you actually commit and do it, it's a lot better than doing 0. So you're creating momentum. You're slowly building momentum. That's not going to exist otherwise.
Yes, and Robert here says less is more, and we have Project Wolf on Twitch watching us saying hello. So fantastic. Adil, if you have any questions, just raise your hand, let me know before we finish. I want to thank you so much, and I want to actually really invite everybody to go and listen to Marketing Geeks. It's one of the best podcasts that I've listened to. These guys are entertaining. They're asking really, really profound questions. They have amazing guests on their show. And it's just really fantastic way to kind of like pass your commute, because that's how I do it. Yeah. Anything else? Where can people find you outside of your podcast?
Well, you can find me on my website, jmackmedia.com, which is JMACK media.com. And but I would really appreciate, just check out the podcast though. So the Marketing Geeks podcast, it's again, we are still in the top 10 on Apple Podcasts, which is really an honor and really cool. And a bit of a prestige builder, authority builder there. Right. And it's been completely business transforming to the whole when we started that show, from where we started to where we are now. Like it's completely kind of transformed the way that I've been able to run my business and the success that I've had. So it's been quite a journey.
So let's finish with this one. Just putting a podcast out there is not enough, right? There's a lot of work that comes behind it to promote it and actually get the listeners and build that momentum. So is there any kind of tip that you can give people, aside from don't stop after 30 episodes? You can, stick with it.
Yeah, there's definitely tips. I don't know about 30 seconds or so, but it starts with every time, if you're going with the interview format, which a lot of people are doing, it starts with leveraging your guests to help promote the show. And if you think about it, if you think about Oprah Winfrey and how she kind of built her audience over time, I think it's a great example. It's kind of like you're leveraging other people's content, because they're coming on, you're interviewing them, they're giving their content. You're leveraging other people's reach, and then you're borrowing it towards yourself. So a certain percentage of every time you have a guest on, ideally, is going to stick around with your show also. And over time, the more you do this and the more you perfect it, the more you're going to build that audience. There's tons of different things, like the rankings go in Apple Podcasts. You want to be making sure that you're asking everybody for a review. You want to be leveraging other podcasters and trying to interview and maybe doing trades with them and kind of leveraging each other's audiences. I mean, there's a lot of strategies and techniques that can be done to kind of get moving in that. And Apple looks at the metrics, like from what I've understand, they're very secretive about their metrics, but like it's been described as like the velocity of subscribers.
Oh, like
so
how
you
fast
want
subscribe to you?
You want subscribers to come at a certain rate, but also at a certain consistency. So they can't come on one day. They have to come like over time, like 5 a day, something like that. So that's one of the ways that they're kind of boosting people up in the rankings. And then again, written reviews. So like anytime you can get somebody to leave a written review, like when anyone listening to the show, if you to this show, if you listen to Marketing Geeks, please leave a written review. If you listen to Ifat's show, leave a written review for her, because it matters. It really makes an impact on the way that the show gets out to a bigger audience.
Got it. So thank you so much, guys. If you want more marketing tips, Marketing Geeks, the podcast, go listen to that. Listen to our subscribe, comment, review. I would love to have that. And next week we are talking about what is it like to be a real man. Yes, there's controversy around that topic. We're going to talk about that with Eric Rogel. Hopefully we'll see you there. Justin, thank you so much once again, guys. Download the checklist right here. It will really benefit you. And then if you need help in taking any of these steps, let us know in the comments and we'll point you to the right direction so you don't do that alone. Thanks so much, Justin. Thank you for being here. You are fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And I'm glad we developed this friendship. That's wonderful. See what, live videos and podcasts can do? Do that too. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Bye, guys.